So in this video, we're going to talk about using Prisma with Turborepo. Now, Turborepo is a high-performance build system for JavaScript and TypeScript, a tool that you can use to create monorepos. So instead of having your different applications or your shared packages deployed in different repositories or depending on external NPM packages or deployed as external NPM packages, you can bring them all inside one repo, hence the name Monorepo, and then share those configs and packages, the UI libraries that are used in your different applications. If you're not comfortable with what Turborepo is or how to set it up, I will include a link to a video that I have on the channel so you can watch that. We walk through what it is and how to set it up, different workspaces, working with different package managers, pipelines, tasks, and more. But in this video, I assume that you already know that. And what we want to do here is we want to create a database package, a workspace that has our database client using Prisma. And again, Prisma is a type-safe ORM for connecting to your database and querying your database. Again, this is not a Prisma course or tutorial. I assume that you already know that. We just want to bring that inside of our monorepo, create a database package and some database access objects or functions that we can share between different apps. So whoever wants to use our data from any app can just import these functions and use them inside of that specific app. Now, the first step is to install Turborepo. There's two ways you can install Turborepo. One is to install it globally inside your local development area or environment. So you can go PNPM. I use PNPM as the package manager. You can use NPM or Yarn and install this globally. The second way is to install it in the local package. Once you've installed this, you can go to get started with a new monorepo. If this is a new one, if there is an existing one, there's also another guide in the documentation. I'm going to include a link to the docs for these specific steps as well. There is a guide specifically for adding a monorepo or turning your current project into a monorepo or adding Turborepo into a monorepo. So we're going to build from scratch using a new monorepo. So what you can do is to run pnpm dlx create turbo at latest. So let's do this together. Pnpm dlx and then create turbo at latest. This is going to walk you through a couple of questions for you to decide where you want to install this monorepo and what package manager you want to use. So where would you like to create? I'm going to choose the current working directory because I'm already in that directory. I'm going to use pnpm as the package manager or for managing my workspaces. And this is going to create a sample project that has two applications inside the apps. So it has a web application and a documentation site. And it also has some shared packages for ESLint config, for TS config, and for our UI. So let's actually jump right in the code and see what this has created. Let me make this a bit smaller. So as I mentioned, inside the apps, we have the docs and the web. These both are two Next.js 14 applications with the app router. And then we have this packages folder where we would host or share our shared packages that either our apps depend on or other packages depend on. And this is a naming convention that you can follow. You don't have to name them apps and packages, but it makes sense. Packages would be shared packages that your apps depend on, and apps are going to be launchable apps like your website or your documentation site. Now here we have the ESLint config, the TS config, and UI. This is a shared UI library that you can share between all of your applications to just have a consistent design system. Now, just to show you from a high level how these packages depend on each other, if I open up one of these websites, for example, the web, if I go to package JSON, I can see inside the dependencies, I have this repo UI, which is the name of that shared UI package. And that mentions that this is a workspace inside of our project. It's not hosted on NPM. It's just a workspace. Inside of the UI, if you look at the package, we see the name there, and that's how we're depending on it. We have some exports from this file, which tells us where we can find components that we want to get out of this shared UI, and for types, and also the entry point into this package for any other application or any other workspace that depends on this UI package. Now, to also show you how this would run, if I come to my terminal now and run pm dev, this is going to run both of the applications, the web and also the docs, or any workspace that have a dev script. Again, reference that other video that I have for how this pipelines or tasks run using Turborepo. But again, from a high level, we have defined this pipeline that has built this basically, or the dev, which I'm using right now. This basically runs the dev script inside of all of our packages. Now, the only two packages that have a dev script is the apps that we have here that runs the next server here, and also the web also runs the next. So basically running the dev script on your root or inside your monorepo is going to launch the dev script for these two applications, and it is launching them on localhost 3000 and localhost 3001. I'm just going to open them to show what they are. So as you can see here, we have the monorepo deployed. This is what comes out of the box. If you click on, you're going to see an alert that says web app. This is the web application, and the other one, similar thing, it just says the doc app. You can also see it here as well. So right now they're just both the same, but you get the idea of having two different applications running separately, two different Next.js applications, that they are both depending on the same UI library that is this, and the same TypeScript and ESLint config. You can have Tailwind config to share, and in this video we're going to share a database as an example of how you would create a package or a workspace to share between your apps. So with this out of the way, let me just close these guys off and go to another guide inside the documentation again for using Prisma with Turborepo. Okay, so we have already done this first step, creating your monorepo. Now we're going to add a new database package. So let me just stop the dev server here. Now what we need to do is to create a new folder here inside of our packages and call it database. You can call it anything that you want, but I'm going to create a database package or workspace that I'm going to share between my other apps. Now inside of your database, you can create a package.json, and inside of it, I'm going to copy some code. This is the name of my workspace, a version, and some exports. I'm going to create a source folder and then an index.ts that is going to export all of the files from within this workspace. I also have some scripts here. dbGenerate, this is going to use the Prisma client to generate a customized Prisma client based on your specific schema. And I have the push that runs Prisma db push and has this skip generate, because this generate, we're already running the generate, so we don't need to run the generate again. This is anytime that you're creating any changes in your schema, you wanted to run this push to migrate your database and then generate your Prisma client. We're going to use MongoDB in this example, but you can use it with your database of choice. Now this package or this workspace has two dependencies. One is Prisma client, and the other one as a dev dependency is the Prisma package itself. Now, a little side note here, if you're using pm like me, you have to copy this code into an npm rc in the root of your application. If you have followed along with me by creating a monorepo from scratch, you should see this file already generated for you. So you can just copy this here and close that off. Now, the next thing we need to do is to run Prisma init. This is going to initialize our schema and give us some environment files so that we can copy our database URL. So what we need to do is to cd into packages and then database. And once we are here, we can run npx Prisma init. I'm going to hit yes. Now, let me close this off for a second here just to see what happened. So this created a couple of files inside of our workspace, which we can use to create our schema and then specify our database URL for whatever database that we are using. So let's look at what has been created here. So inside of this database package now, I have this Prisma folder, a .env and a .ignore file. Inside of Prisma, I'm going to create my client and connection to my database using my database URL or connection string. And also I can define some schemas for my database tables and collections in this case because I'm using MongoDB. So let me copy my specific schema. So what I have here is that I'm using this generator for the client. This is where you need to specify what database you're using and the name of the environment variable that you're going to use to provide your connection string. I have a user collection with ID, email, name, and to-dos, and a to-do collection with similar fields and a user ID that ties back into my users. Again, not specifically relevant to this video, it's just regular Prisma stuff, but this is the schema that I'm going to use to generate a Prisma client and share that client between all the applications that want to use this data from my database. Now, the next thing you need to do to connect to your database is to actually bring in your own connection string. Again, this is something that you would have depending on the database that you're using. I'm using MongoDB, so I'm going to copy my connection string here and come back. So I've copied my connection string, and now let's see what is the next step. We've already created the scripts inside of our package JSON, and now what we need to do is to also tell our Monorepo inside of our pipeline for the tasks that we want to run. We wanted to tell it to every time that it wants to run the build command or the dev command to run the generate command for our Prisma. In case we have changed our schema, it's going to generate a new Prisma client, so we're not going to get any error because of the change we had in the schema. So let me go to our Turbo JSON. This is where you would define your pipelines. And what I'm going to add to it is this DB generate. This is a task that we're defining. Cache false. We don't want to cache the result of generating a Prisma client. It doesn't quite work perfectly with different package managers, or it works perfectly, but it produces different results depending on which package manager you're using. So the documentation recommends that we don't cache the Prisma client. That's the result of running this DB generate script. And then now our build command, as you can see here, has a depends on key that says, hey, anytime that you want to run the build scripts, this depends on the build script on all of our workspaces. And then it also depends on this DB generate. So run the generate script to generate a Prisma client before you're running the build. And similarly, it also has this for the dev. So anytime we're running our local development server, it also generates a Prisma client first before starting up our application. So we always have the up-to-date Prisma client based on our schema. So that was this step. Now we can export our client. This is to create a connection to Prisma client and then importing it in whatever application that now we need to use, or we want to use this connection to fetch our database. So let me close this off and walk you through this step. I'm going to go to my packages, to my database. I'm going to copy some code and explain what I'm doing here. So let's go inside of this source that I just copied. So inside of it, I have 3 files. One is the client. This is where we're going to create a Prisma client. This is the recommended way from the documentation to create a Prisma client. We're going to create a global variable for development environment. And we're just creating a Prisma that is just calling this new Prisma client that we get out of the package. Now we're getting these squiggly lines here because we actually never installed these packages. We included them inside of our package JSON, but never installed them. So what we need to do is to come on into our terminal and run pm install. This is going to look at inside of the package JSON of all of our packages and install and create node modules for all of our workspaces. So let's hit true. This is going to delete our node modules and create them or reinstall them from scratch. Okay, so let's go back now to the other file that we have, which is to-dos. Let me close the terminal here. So here we're getting this Prisma. We're importing it from the client that we just created. and I'm exporting some database access objects or functions. For example, here I'm getting the to-dos, and I'm using the Prisma client to get the to-dos collection and then find many. Similarly, for creating a to-do from a title and a user ID, again using the Prisma client. And now I want to also share these functions with any application that wants to get, create, or update to-dos inside of their own components. Now, the last file that we have here is this index, which is basically exporting everything from the client and from the to-do. And this was the entry point, or what we exported from this package. If going back to the package JSON, you remember in the beginning, we had this export pointing to source index, which is basically importing and exporting client and our to-dos. Now let's go inside of our web application, and in the package JSON, now I want to create a new dependency just similar to the one that I have. I want to create another one. The name is database. So I'm saying this web application depends on the database. And if I'm going to save this, close out of that, let's also close out of the client. Going inside of the app directory, as I mentioned, these are Next.js application using the app directory. So we have the typical layout and a home page here. So let's go inside of our home page and bring one of these to-do access functions to maybe fetch some to-dos. So let's go down here. I'm going to fetch some to-dos using this get to-dos function that my database workspace is now exporting. So let's import this up top. So I'm going to come here, just like the button that we are getting from our UI library. Now I'm getting this get to-dos from my database. Now again, we're seeing this as squiggly line because we again added this inside of our package JSON as a dependency, but we never run the pnpm install. So this is just like any other npm package. It's just that instead of being hosted on npm, it's just hosted or is live inside of your own workspaces. Anytime you're adding these type of dependencies, you have to run the install command again for Turborepo to go ahead and also create these node modules and link them together inside of your workspaces so it works correctly. But before we do that, let's actually come down here and also turn our page component into an async function so we can actually await getting these to-dos. And instead of returning a JSX element directly, we're going to return a promise that returns a JSX element. So let me open up the terminal one more time. I'm going to clear this out and run pnpm install again and run pnpm dev. Now, one thing you can do is to pass a filter if you wanted to only run one of these applications. I'm just passing a filter and say just run the web application, not the docs. This is going to actually only run the dev script for our web application. As you can see here, it ran the database db generate. This is because we created that pipeline to run the generate to create a new Prisma client from our schema anytime that we are running the dev, and then it's running the dev script inside of our web workspace, and it's not running the doc workspace anymore. So now that I have these to-dos, maybe let me just close this off, come down here at the bottom, maybe we can just have a div, and then inside of it I'm going to get my to-dos, map over every to-do, and for each one let's just show the to-do ID and a text, and let's close this div off, close this off. As you can see here, we have type safety. Now text doesn't exist on the type to-do, there's a title instead of the text. Now this is the benefit of using Prisma or React Server components, really, because we are fetching data right inside of our component. This is using the get to-dos function, which uses the Prisma client. Prisma was type safe ORM. So not only we're fetching or querying our database, but it is also type safe. And even if we pass this into client components, now these to-dos, as you can see, as I hover over it, has all the types on its own. So it gives us end-to-end type safety from the server all the way to the client, now inside of a monorepo in this case. Now, if I go ahead and open up the localhost 3000, we should see our to-dos at the bottom of the page. I could have just get rid of this boilerplate code here, but I didn't. But you can see here, learning Next.js and learning React. These are the only to-dos that I have created in this database. But the point is, now we're using this get to-dos from our shared packages, which is not inside of our app or web or Next.js here. It's inside of this database package we created that we can now share not only the Prisma client, but also the database access functions like to-dos in this example you can have for users and whatnot. And any app inside of your apps, any launchable app or any other package can really use this same functions and Prisma client. And that's a wrap for this video, folks. We covered using Prisma with Turborepo to create a monorepo and to create a shared database package inside of our monorepo to share this Prisma client that's generated based on our schema, and also database access functions for whatever app that needs to use our database, instead of them creating their own client or their own schemas or their own functions. We create them once and give them access to these functions. Now, another way would have been to generate the client inside of your shared package and let every app create their own functions. That's also viable, or you can do. But I just wanted to show how you would go about sharing not only the Prisma client, but also your functions. If you have any questions, like always, hit me up in the comments and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.